Hey, everybody. Welcome to Backstage with PV3. I am Pat Quinn, filling in for Pete Vargas today, who is on location speaking on a stage right now. And so I'm excited that you are here, and I'm excited about what we're going to talk about today because I know a lot of people fashion themselves as good storytellers. A lot of people fashion themselves. I love to tell stories, or I'm a good storyteller. And I'd love to hear if you're here live with us right now. I'd love to hear in the chat. Are you a good storyteller? How do you view yourself as a storyteller? Do you think you're good at telling stories? That's what I'd love to hear. Because I talk to people who are like, I'm great at telling stories. I talk to other people who are like, it's really difficult for me to tell stories. I'm not a natural storyteller. And I know people who are really good at telling stories, but when I see them speak, one of the things that I realize is you're good at telling stories, but you're not good at using stories to get people to want to do business with you. You're not good at using stories to get people to want to go deeper with you or say yes to your offer or to get people to take action. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. If that's what we're going to talk about today, is actually using stories for a purpose, not just to tell a story. Now, that doesn't mean you have to use this in all areas of your life. That just means that when you want someone to take action, when you want someone to listen to you and not just sit there and say, that was nice, that was funny, that was sad, but can I work with you? Can I go further with you? Can I learn more about you? Can I hear more from you? Can I join? Can I attend? Can I follow? That's taking action. That's our goal. And stories can help you do that. Stories will always sell better than facts will sell. We say facts create arguments, and stories actually sell. And it's true. If you've ever tried to say facts to anybody lately, you'll know that the number one thing that happens when you state facts to them is that they argue with you. They argue back at you. And so what we want to do is make sure that you're using stories to sell, not facts. And we want to make sure you're using stories in the right way. So welcome, everybody. Leona's here from Las Vegas. Heather says it's a great distinction. Jackie says, I'm better at telling stories after attending the Signature Talk Workshop. That's great. We got a bunch of storytellers here. Dr. Leona is good at telling stories. Paul says, as a singer-performer, I'm very good at singing stories, but not good at speaking stories. What an interesting distinction you have there. Tiuda says, I love storytelling, but am I good at it? It depends how it's received. And Mark says, I'm good at telling stories to make people more interested in your content. Fascinating. What a great distinction that is as well. And so here's what I want you to know. If we haven't met before, I am Pat Quinn, and I have one goal for you. I have one goal for you when you have the chance to tell stories, whether that's in conversation, whether that's on social media, whether that's in an interview, a podcast, or if you do get to take the stage and get to speak to a group of people. My goal for when you tell your stories is that the audience would want to go deeper with you. The audience would want to take the next step with you. Because I know there's some speaking coaches who will teach you how to be entertaining. There are some speaker coaches who will teach you how to make the audience laugh or cry, which is not our goal. Remember, criers are not buyers. Our goal is never to make the audience cry. Now, that might happen as we tell the story, but that is not our goal. What's our goal? Our goal is that the audience would take the next step with you. Our goal is that the audience would go deeper with you. And for that to happen, you not only have to be telling the right stories, you have to be telling stories in the right order, in the right way. And so today, what I would like to talk to you, well, I've taken over Backstage with PV3. What I'd like to talk to you about is the 3 stories that you need and the order that you should tell them. You need 3 different types of stories. And I think that's the next big learning for everybody here, is that there aren't just people who tell stories and people who don't tell stories. There's people who really understand storytelling, and that not all stories are the same. Some stories are just entertaining stories. My dad could tell the funniest stories, but he wasn't trying to sell us anything. Some people tell really inspiring stories. You get done hearing their stories and you're like, I want to go take over the world, because they told such an inspiring story. But today I'd like to talk to you about three different types of stories. They're not entertaining stories. They're not funny stories. They're not even inspiring stories. But these three stories, I call it the triple threat. These three stories, when you link them, one and then the other and then the third, they're an unbeatable combination. They are an unbeatable combination because they walk people right down the path to doing business with you. And here's the good news. You never have to feel salesy. You never have to feel pushy. I talk to people all the time who say I'm bad at selling. And I'm like, are you good at storytelling? And they say, yeah. And I say, well, good, because you'll never have to sell anything again. Just tell these three stories in order. You have to do it in order, and you have to make sure they're the right type of story. But if you have these three stories in the right order, it doesn't matter if you're in front of one person across the table at Starbucks or if you're in a room full of 50 people. It doesn't matter if you're online like I am today or on social media doing a Facebook Live or if you're in the room with people. It doesn't matter if it's, one person or 100 people. It doesn't matter if you have 5 minutes or 45 minutes. These three stories linked end to end, one after the other in the correct order, is what's going to make it happen. And you'll never have to sell again. If you never have to sell again, if you never have to feel salesy, have that pit in your stomach when you know you're being pushy and you know you're doing something that isn't in alignment with how you are, but you can just tell stories, that is the greatest feeling in the world. And so that's what we have up for today. The three stories that you need to get people to actually take action and follow you and do what you want them to do, go deeper with you. So let's get started. The very first story that you should tell, very first story that you tell. Most people get this wrong, by the way. Most people tell the wrong story first. About the two biggest mistakes that I see in storytelling is, number one, I'm going to tell my most inspiring story first. And I would not tell your most inspiring story first. Like, I used to be homeless and now I'm rich. That's a great, inspiring story. Not the right story to start with, unless you're speaking to an audience of people who are homeless. Some people tell their saddest story. A lot of people want to tell the story when one of their parents died or when their dad died or when a tragedy affected their life. And that is not the right story to tell. That's not the right story to tell because this is your first story. You just met these people. Like, this is a new audience and you just met these people and they don't know you. So to tell a very sad story about trauma in your life is not the right story to start with. This is like the first date. And you don't share everything on a first date. Like, you just share things that you have in common. So somebody just put it in the chat. Who was that? Scott Kane just put it in the chat. The story to start with, the right story to start with, is a connection story. It is a story that connects with the audience. What does that mean? That means you have something in common with the audience. Okay, so now first we have to ask you the question, who is your ideal audience? Who is the audience for whatever story you're telling? And what are they experiencing in life? And that may change from year to year. That may change from day to day. That changes during season. During COVID, many of us were facing the same things. Many of us were isolated. Many of us were spending too much time with our families. Many of us were gaining weight. And so stories about gaining weight, stories about being fed up with your family because you're all stuck in the house together, stories about being isolated and missing seeing people face to face. Those were great connection stories because everybody was experiencing, because lots of people were experiencing it. And so that's a great connection story at that time to that audience. So my question for you is, for your ideal audience, what is the right connection story? Well, what most people do when they get in front of an audience is tell a separation story. What's a separation story? The separation story is a story where you have done something the audience hasn't. So I've built a company bigger than yours. I've grown my business faster than you have. I have a list that's bigger than yours. And there is a place in your presentation for credibility. Make no mistake. I've worked with some of the greatest speakers in the world. I've worked with Grant Cardone and Tony Robbins and Damon John and the Sharks from Shark Tank. And many of you have not. And there's a place to tell you that to build my credibility. There's a place to tell you that so you nod your head and say, this might be the type of person I want to work with. He's got a lot of credibility. But the opening story is not that place. The opening story is the place to tell a story about something we have in common. So if you're choosing between different stories, what story should I start with? The question is simple. The filter is simple. Which of these stories that I'm choosing between would the maximum number of people in my audience nod their heads and say that same thing happened to me? That's the right story. So if I'm speaking to a group of parents, now I've got some pretty extraordinary kids. I've got one daughter who's one of the smartest people in the world. She's a graduate student at one of the top universities in the world. Less than 1% of 1% of students get into this university, and she's going to get a PhD from there next year. So if I'm giving a parenting presentation to a group of 100 parents, I could say my daughter's one of the smartest kids in the world, and I would separate. I could say my daughter got accepted at this college. None of your kids are going to get accepted at that college. And I would separate from the audience. Or I could tell a story that every parent in the room would relate to. A story about if it's, bedtime and struggling to get my kids to go to bed on time. A story about my kids when they were teenagers having their phones out at the dinner table. And I'm trying to talk to them and they're looking down at their phones. And every parent in the room is nodding their head. Every parent in the room is like, oh, can't stand that when they have their phones out. A story about trying to get my kids to go outside in the summer because kids don't like to go outside anymore. They like to stay inside in the air conditioning and play video games. And I was like, when I was a kid, my parents locked us outside in the morning and we had to stay outside all day. And every parent in the room would nod their heads and be like, yeah, that's it. That's it. That's exactly what it's like. They won't go outside now. They won't play. They won't get off the couch. Like, that's universal. Will there be a time to say, and my daughter got super smart and went to this great college? Yes, later. But the opening story, the first story you want to tell is a connection story. Does this have to be around the problem that you solve for your audience? Not necessarily. Does it have to introduce the topic that you're going to talk about? You get bonus points if it introduces your topic, but it doesn't have to. It can just be a story that connects with the audience. And sometimes it's real reason, like related to the event or related to what happened last night. I'm actually speaking right now at a 10X Stages event in Miami, Florida, and the room is like 30 degrees below zero. I'm telling you, we're in Miami, it's 85 degrees and sunny outside, and this ballroom, you've been in some cold ballrooms, you've never been one. Like, people are asking for extra napkins, not because they're messy, but because they want to cover up with the extra napkins and make blankets out of them. That's how cold it is. And I don't have to tell a story to this audience. All I have to do to this audience is walk in and tell a story about being cold. I haven't been this cold since January in my home in Wisconsin. Like, I don't know, the air conditioning's broken or something. It just won't shut off and it just keeps blowing cold air in. And I can do that. There was an accident right outside the hotel this morning. So half of our audience was late this morning, and the other half had to navigate around this accident in Miami traffic to get here this morning. And so I could tell a traffic story. I could tell a story about being late to an event. And for this audience on this day, I'd have that in common with them. So sometimes you have a prepared story. Sometimes it's about the time of year. I'm sure in November of next year, we're going to tell, you could say, is anybody tired of election ads yet? Is anybody tired of political ads on television yet? Like, everybody in the room is going to nod their heads and be like, yep, we're tired of political ads. Like, that's all you need, is to connect. And by the way, this is what you do naturally. What you do naturally when you meet somebody new, whether it's a first date or a phone call or an introduction at a networking event, is look for things you have in common. Oh, you're from Texas? I was in Texas once. Oh, you have children? I have children too. Oh, you like that football team? I like football. I cheer for a different team. Like, why are you doing that? You're doing that because you have things in common. And that's the first step of the trust building process, is having things in common with people. And Daniel Pink's research supports this. Daniel Pink's research shows that we want to buy from people we have things in common with. if you share a name with your salesperson, if you share a birth month with your salesperson, you are 10% more likely to buy from that salesperson. We want to do business with people who have things in common with us. If you have 3 salespeople to work with, and one of them is much older than you in a different season of life, and one of them is much younger than you and in a different season of life, but one of them is in your season of life with kids your age, or experiencing the same health issues that you are, or in the same stage of a relationship that you are, that's the one we are more likely to do business with. And so you have to get this out in a story. So the connection story has to be a personal story. It can't be a client story, can't be a story you read in Chicken Soup for the Soul. It has to be a personal story. The opening story should be about you, and it should be told from a first-person point of view. And this is hard for a lot of people because they like to talk to them about their life in a third person. Like, you know, I can refer to myself by my first name and say, Pat grew up very poor, or, you know, there was a time when things were really bad in my life. And don't do it in a passive voice. Just be like, I remember growing up that sometimes my mom would make a tuna casserole, and there was 3 big bags of egg noodles and 1 tiny little can of tuna. And that was tuna casserole because it was cheap and we ate a lot. And it was a lot of noodles and a very little bit of tuna. And to the right audience, they'd be nodding their heads being like, I remember tuna casserole. Was there a bag of frozen peas in there? And I'm like, you bet there was a bag of frozen peas. It wouldn't be tuna casserole without that. Look, Laura is already nodding her head saying, hey, I remember that tuna casserole. I remember that. There were some cans of chicken, cream of chicken or cream of celery soup in there, weren't there? So that is a connection story. And you need one. You need one because if you don't connect, they're not going to go deeper with you. The first role of any conversation, the first role of any talk, the first role of any presentation is to connect with the audience. So that's the first type of story that you need. But you can't stop there. The second story that you need, and these go in order, the second story that you need is a transformation story. So we start with a connection story, and then we have a transformation story. And so what's a transformation story? Transformation story has 3 parts. Here are the 3 parts: before, the pivot, and the after. The before describes, and if it's a personal story, it describes your life before. What was your life before the transformation? And that should match the audience's current experience. And so if the audience is struggling with stress, this should be a story about someone experiencing stress. Ideally you, but if you don't have a stress story, tell a client story, tell a sister story, tell a story about your mom. Tell a story about someone who has experienced what the audience is currently experiencing. That's the before. Then the middle step, before, pivot, after. The pivot is the second step, and the pivot is what changed. Then they started our program. Then they ate differently. Then they stopped eating carbs, whatever the pivot is. And then the third part of this story, it's a 3-stage story. We call it a 3-act play. The third part of this story is the after. What is your life like after the change? And for some of you, that'll be now in your transformation stories. For some of you, the stories happened so long ago that it was what happened right after. And so what you want to tell is a transformation story. And the transformation story has to connect with the audience in 2 places. The now, or the before, the before has to describe your customer's life now. What are they experiencing now? So if you have an offer that's helping people who are in broken relationships, you'll tell a broken relationship story. If you are speaking to an audience of people who are, struggling to lose weight, you should tell a story about a time when you were struggling to lose weight. And if you don't have one, you should tell a client story, a friend story, a relative story. You should tell some other story. But this is the first part of a connection story. Then the pivot. The pivot is actually what you're selling. And so if you really do want the audience to take action and work with you, the pivot is what they're buying. So if you follow Pete Vargas, Pete Vargas takes people who have a message but can't get the word out, and he helps them get the word out. using a process of getting on stages, using stages to grow your message, using stages to grow your business. So the pivot is stages. So he can tell a story. Oh, when I was first getting started, my friend Daryl Scott, nobody knew about him. He was getting paid $300 to do church presentations. And then I started getting him on stages. That's the pivot in the middle. And after that, he was making $12 million a year for his nonprofit, speaking all over the country, and he's in hundreds of schools. That's the after. Before, pivot, after. That's a transformation story. Now, to the right audience, an audience of people who match the before. Hey, I'm struggling to get my message out there. And they want the after. I'd love to make $12 million and have my message all over the world. Can I buy your pivot? Can you help me get on stages? That's a transformation story. Remember, in the transformation story, you're selling the pivot. So if you're a financial advisor, taking people from you're struggling with your finances and retirement to retirement is taken care of. You can sleep well at night. And I've got a pivot process to do that. You can't use a weight loss story for your transformation story, okay? Because that pivot isn't what you're selling. So I want to make sure you're not just telling any old transformation story. I used to be short and now I'm tall. Well, that's a growth story. I used to be heavy and now I'm the right weight. That's a transformation story, but it doesn't match what I'm selling. The pivot has to match what you're selling. The word we use for this is alignment. Alignment means the story that you're telling matches the content that you're teaching, which matches the offer that you're making. Three things need to line up for your presentation to be in alignment. The story that you tell, the transformation story that you tell, not the connection story. The connection story is just what you start with to build trust and likability. Now we're past that. Now we're into our transformation story, and this story matters. This story matters that it is in alignment with your content. So whatever pivot you put there, that's what you're going to teach us, and that's what you're going to sell us. That's alignment. And so if your topic is getting your books in order and the finances of your company in order, your transformation story has to be a story of a company that did not have its books in order, turning into a company that did have its books in order. If you're helping people go from lonely to in a relationship, your transformation story has to be about somebody who was lonely and ended up in relationships. If your transformation is from somebody who was low energy into somebody who was high energy, that has to be your story. And if you don't have that story, because not everybody's story is the business that they're in, tell somebody else's story. Tell a client story, tell a relative story, but you need a transformation story that shows the transformation of what the audience is going to do. And I'm telling you, I watch speakers all the time who speak for 45 minutes and then make an offer. And the one thing they never did was tell a story of transformation, of what your life looked like now compared to what your life will look like then. So some of you have heard my overnight oats story, but there was a period in my life where I was gaining weight and I was low energy. Every afternoon, I just wanted to take a nap, and I wasn't even sleeping well at night, even though I was tired all the time. And I remember it was Thanksgiving. I was with my sister on Thanksgiving, and she said, "Hey, have you ever tried overnight oats?" And I said, "Overnight oats? You mean the mushy stuff we used to eat as a kid?" And she said, "Yeah, but it's not like that anymore. This is delicious. It's overnight oats." I didn't believe her, but I tried it because I was desperate. And so every day for 6 weeks, I had overnight oats for breakfast and for lunch. That's what I had for breakfast and lunch. And 6 weeks later, I'd gone from gaining weight to losing 1.5 pounds. I'd gone from being low energy in the afternoon to having steady energy all throughout the day. And I went from not sleeping at night to sleeping like a baby. And so if you're struggling with sleep, with energy, with weight gain, you should try overnight oats. Now, let's analyze what I just did there. First, the before. The before was weight gain, low energy, not sleeping. And that's got to match what your audience is experiencing. If your audience hears that and they're like, "Oh, I'm getting all those. I got all those." That's a great story. I coach a lot of people who are speaking to women at or near menopause. and they're talking about belly fat and brain fog. I'm like, that's $1 million business, belly fat and brain fog, because every woman in their target audience is like, oh, belly fat and brain fog, belly fat and brain fog. And so that's the before. The pivot is what I'm selling. So in this presentation, I'm selling overnight oats. I'm selling this process of overnight oats. And then the after, let's look at the after, because the after are the results that my audience wants. And if I talk about those results, and the audience isn't like, I want that, then it's not going to work. And Scott points out a good point. I reminded people of I went from not sleeping to sleeping. I went from gaining weight to losing weight. So I'm reminding people of the old and taking them through the transformation into the new. And who gets all the credit? No, not me. The oats. The beauty of the transformation story is that the process gets the credit. The pivot gets the credit. What does that mean? That means they got to buy. That means they got to buy what I'm selling. They got to buy my pivot. That's the power of a transformation story. So I'll give you a couple other strategies for the transformation story in each section. Section 1, the before. It's okay to show your weaknesses here. Don't try to look good. Try to look like the audience. I was gaining weight. I was frustrated. I used the words when I told the story, I'm desperate. I was desperate. And if that matches my audience, I am going to close it. I'm going to close the audience. What do you want to know about the pivot? Here's what I threw into that pivot story. If you want to see an advanced pro ninja tip, what I threw into the pivot of the story was my own skepticism. When my sister said, have you tried overnight oats? What was my first response? Well, that mushy stuff that we used to eat as a kid? There's a reason I did that. Because I know when I mention oatmeal to most people, their first response is, oatmeal? So I mirrored them. And then I finished that pivot with, I didn't believe her, but I tried it anyway because I was desperate. What am I modeling for my audience there? You don't have to 100% believe me. Try it. Just try it. And so the two things I like in the pivot are when you show some skepticism. I told somebody I could help improve their speaking so they could sell more from the stage. And they said to me, yeah, I've had other speaking coaches before. And I said, okay, I'll give you a free session. You can try it. And they tried it, and they've been working with me ever since. What is that little pivot picture paint? That it's okay to think that I can't solve your problem. That's okay. That's a very normal thing. It's okay to think that one pill can't cure it, or one exercise could change your abs, or one oatmeal could lose weight, or one coach could help you go from not getting on stages to getting on stages. Like, we all have bought programs that didn't work, and so we're going to be a little bit skeptical. So it's okay to be skeptical. It's okay to say I'm skeptical. Build that into your pivot, and your audience will thank you for it. I even built into my pivot that I didn't believe her, but I tried it anyway, showing that you don't even have to have full trust in me. Just have enough trust to try it. What are other things you might want to build into your pivot? Well, it doesn't work in the oatmeal story because it's oatmeal. But in another pivot story, a lot of people like to build in that I invested. Pete Vargas rarely tells a story that doesn't have as part of the pivot, I invested money to get better at this. Why is he building into his pivot that he invested money to get better at this? And I've heard Pete tell probably 50 transformation stories. Have you heard Pete's weight loss story? Because Pete used to weigh quite a bit, and he's lost a ton of weight, especially recently. Well, he invested in a one-on-one coach. That's part of the pivot. Pete is a great tennis player. If you don't know much about Pete Vargas, he's a great tennis player. I think he was the top-rated adult tennis player in Colorado at one point for his age and his weight. Just kidding. But how did he get so good? He was already good at tennis, and then he got great at tennis. Like, if you know tennis, he's like a 4-5 or a 5-0 player. Like, he's on the scale of tennis players. He is a good tennis player. How did he get so good? He invested in a tennis coach that had played at Wimbledon. Like, I think it's Jeff Salzenstein as his tennis coach. Like, he invested in a coach. Why does he build that into his pivot? Almost every story he tells, from getting better at speaking, where he invested in me, to getting better at webinars, where he invested with this person or that person, because he's modeling for the audience that transformation takes change in your behavior, but transformation also takes investment of time, investment of energy, investment of purpose, and investment of money. So it doesn't work in every story. I have an oatmeal story, and I'd love to tell you I invested $100,000 in oatmeal, but I didn't. I bought a box of Quaker oats. Like, it was a $10 investment at the most. But if you are selling something a little more expensive to your audience than oatmeal, consider putting the investment right into the pivot. So I've added 2 things to your pivot now. Skepticism. I didn't know if this would work for me or not. And I love that. We've coached a lot of network marketers, and a lot of network marketers, when they first reveal their products or their business opportunity to a new person in conversation, they act like they knew this was going to work from the beginning. And what you should act like is, I didn't think this was ever going to work, but I was desperate for it, so I tried it. And oh my gosh, it worked better than I even thought it could. That's a much better story than I knew it was going to work from the beginning, because your audience is probably skeptical as well. And if there's going to be sticker shock in your price, like people are expecting to invest $1,000 with you and your price is actually $5,000, put some sticker shock in your pivot. And the first time my coach told me how much it was going to be, I just about choked on my throat. Like, I couldn't believe how expensive it was, but I sucked it up. I made the investment, and it has made all the difference in the world. And then the thing I would tell you about the after is that don't make the claims too outrageous. You're still trying to connect with the audience. So you'll notice in my oatmeal story, I didn't say that I lost 100 pounds in 6 weeks. Partly because most people aren't looking to lose 100 pounds. Partly because it would have raised skepticism if I would have said I lost 100 pounds in 6 weeks. I think I said I lost 1.5 pounds. Instead of gaining weight, I've now lost 1.5 pounds. That's a very reasonable quote. And I saw somebody ask in the chat, what if I haven't, what if my business hasn't taken off yet? What if I'm not to the end of the story? Well, if you haven't seen an upturn in your story, like if I'm still gaining weight, it's a little too early for me. This isn't a transformation story yet. It's just the first 2/3 of a transformation story. You have to wait until the line turns up. Now, the story doesn't have to be finished. I'm not done losing weight with oatmeal, but it has to be far enough along that the audience wants my results. And if I went from gaining weight to losing weight, low energy to high energy, not sleeping to sleeping like a baby, then I think you actually want, that's enough. That's enough. The story's not done yet, but that's enough for the story. So I try to keep my claims reasonable. I try to keep them within the goals and reach of the audience so that I'm not raising skepticism. I'm actually raising confidence in what I'm doing. So now we're going to start pairing them together. First, we start with a connection story to build trust and have things in common with the audience. And we're going to follow that immediately with a transformation story. So now the audience likes me. And then when they hear my transformation story, who are they cheering for in the story? They're cheering for me because they want me to have the transformation. But now watch how the mind works. You and I are alike. That's the first part of this. That's the connection story. You and I are alike. And you made this transformation. What does that say about me? So here's the thing. I'm the exact same height as Michael Jordan. I know that because he walked by me once on the way off the court, and we are the exact same height. We're both like 6'6". And that's where the similarities end. Very few people would say I have much in common with Michael Jordan. So because I have nothing in common with Michael Jordan, he's in great shape. I'm not. I eat oatmeal. He probably doesn't. He can jump like 10 feet off the ground. I can barely jump over the lines in the parking lot. Like, we have nothing in common. So when Michael Jordan says, I made it to the NBA, I don't think I can make it to the NBA. I don't. But when I have somebody who I have something in common with, somebody who went to my high school, and I know, like, we have a lot in common, and then I watch that person succeed, or transform is the better word. When I watch that person a transformation story, I right away think, hey, I could have that transformation because they're like me. This is why the connection story by itself doesn't do it. And the transformation story by itself doesn't do it. How many times have you heard a transformation story and you've thought to yourself, well, yeah, that's you? Like, have you ever seen a guru on the stage? Like somebody big, like Tony or Grant or somebody like that, say, yeah, I held a webinar the other day and it sold $1 million. And the first thought in your head is, well, yeah, that's you. You have a list of 1 million people. You have an Instagram following of tons of people. You have a studio and 6 cameramen moving around you at all time. That's you. A better story to tell in that situation would be, I remember when I was getting started, I had no list, no money. I didn't even have a camera. I just used my laptop, and there was a camera built into my laptop, and I held a webinar and I made money. And then you're like, so what did they do there? They did the connection followed by the transformation. The connection was no money, no camera. Like, you have to do both. Otherwise, they're going to hear the transformation story and say, well, that's you. You're not like me. So if I were going to tell a weight loss story, I'd start with the fact that I eat at a lot of fast food restaurants. I don't like to exercise. I don't like to get up early in the morning. And I've never liked running. And now I've lost some weight. Now my audience is saying, oh, you're probably one of those morning people. I hate morning people. Or, oh, you're probably one of those people who enjoys running. How can anybody enjoy running? Like, no, I have these things in common with you. And now I made a transformation. So it's possible for you. That's why you need them both, connection and transformation. So those are your first 2 stories. You need a connection story, you need a transformation story, and now watch this third one, because this third one is a sneaky one. And we'll work a little magic on you here. Third one, we're going to call a teaching story. Okay, we're going to call it a teaching story. I'm going to teach you something. I'm going to teach you how to make oatmeal. I'm going to teach you how to make overnight oats. But it's not really a teaching story, so if you wrote down teaching story, you can take that and draw a line through it and instead replace it with, it's a customer journey story. It's a customer journey story. Cloaked, disguised, Halloween's coming up, so we'll do the disguise thing. It's a customer journey story disguised as a teaching story. The truth is, it's both. This story is going to teach you something, but this story is also going to map out the customer journey for you. Okay. And so what is a customer journey story? A customer journey story is a teaching story wrapped in a frame, and the frame is the customer journey story. So let me give you an example. I'll try to do an oatmeal example. I was doing a training just like this training a couple of weeks ago. And one of the people who was on the training signed up for one of our free health assessment calls at the end of it. And while I was on that health assessment call with them, they asked me for my recipe for overnight oats, and here's what I told them. First, you buy Quaker oatmeal, and now I'm going to teach the whole recipe. The next 5 minutes will be me teaching the whole recipe, okay? And so it's great teaching. And here's the thing about a teaching cloaked as a customer journey story. It has to have teaching. This is not a testimonial. This is not a case study. This is teaching you. So I'm going to teach you my overnight oats recipe. You take oats, you add milk, you leave it overnight. There it is. Okay. But that's not why I told you the story. I told you the story because of the frame around the story. And the frame around the story is, I was on a training just like this training. And at the end of that training, someone signed up for one of our health assessment calls. And on that call, she asked me for my recipe. That's the story. What is that? Why did I do that? I did that. Now, we're play acting here. So I did that so that the audience would be ready to sign up for a health assessment call. I did that to map out the customer journey. So let's say you're selling online courses. And let's say you're selling online courses on a podcast. Okay? Here's the story I want you to tell. And it could be a podcast about health. It could be a podcast about finances, or whatever your online course is about. That's what it's about. Okay, so I've got an online course about money, and I'm on a podcast about money. In one of my answers to a question, or in one of the stories that I tell, I should say, Roger is someone who was listening to me on a podcast just like this one a few weeks ago. And at the end of the podcast, Roger signed up for my online course. And while he was taking that online course, he emailed me a question about stock options. Let me teach you what I told him about stock options. Teaching. It's great content, but that's not why I told the story. I told the story so that the audience would see themselves in the journey. The audience would see what to do next. First, you listen to the podcast. At the end of the podcast, you sign up for the online course. That's the customer journey. And while you're taking that online course, you get to email me questions, even better. Like, that's the journey. So my question is, what do you want the audience to do next? If you want the audience to come to one of your weekend retreats, then while you're telling a teaching story, I want you to tell a story about a customer who came to one of your weekend retreats. And it would be even better if the customer started at an event just like this. And so if you're on a Facebook Live, say, I was doing a Facebook Live last week and somebody put in the comments that they want to come to one of my weekend retreats. And this weekend they were at one of my weekend retreats. And then I taught them this, and then teach. It's a teaching story. But it's framed in a customer journey story where somebody went from a Facebook Live to my weekend retreat. So what do you want the audience to do next? Tell a story about somebody who's done it, somebody who started where we are today. So I'm going to go back across the hallway here in a little bit and speak on the 10X Stages stage. So I'm going to tell a story about somebody who recently came to one of our 10X Stages workshop, the one in August in Denver. And after that, they signed up for whatever I'm selling at the workshop today. And I'm mapping the journey. So often people don't work with you after you talk to them because they don't know what that would look like. Whose fault is that? The customer's fault or the speaker's fault? It's the speaker's fault because the speaker didn't paint a picture of what it would look like. Tell a story of what working with you looks like. And by the way, if you are ever speaking where you can't sell, if you ever get on a media interview, you can't make an offer. Most podcasts, you can't make an offer. Lots of stages, you can't make an offer. If you have a teaching story that is actually a customer journey story, you don't have to make an offer because you told them how to work with. Like, the story is the offer. If I was trying to sell you my workshop, I would say, a lot of people who listen to this somebody who listened to this podcast the last time I co-hosted was at my workshop last weekend. And now everybody here knows I have a workshop. I don't have to make an offer. You'll find it. Go Google it. Go to our website. You'll find it. Like, the customer journey mapped out. Like, let's say you are a high price consultant and you only do $1 million consulting deals with Fortune 500 companies. You're speaking to your audience. Your audience is listening. Everybody in the room is hearing you and thinking you're smart, but nobody knows how to work with you. Like, I wonder if he does an event. I wonder if he has a book. Maybe he wrote a book. If you would tell one story during that talk. Yes, I was over at one of the companies, one of our consulting clients, that they actually found us on the radio show, just like the one I'm doing today. And they became one of our largest consulting clients. I actually spent a lot of time in their office consulting with their C-suite executives and helping them with this problem. And I was over there the other day, and it was good. And so Marilyn says that example sounds like a testimonial. What's the difference between a customer journey wrapper and a testimonial? The difference is a testimonial doesn't have content teaching built into it. This is cloaked in teaching. And so even in that story where I say I was over at one of my high-priced consulting clients, and here's what I taught them. I taught them the 6 steps to getting your message out to the world. Step 1, step 2. It's always teaching. So when people hear it, they don't think, oh, he's being a little salesy. He's thinking, wow, this person has great content. And the way to access that content is to become a consulting client, or to go to the weekend retreat, or to go to the workshop, or to whatever it is. Even if you're giving something away for free. And by the way, today we've got a great gift for you, which is a story journal to help you keep track of these 3 types of stories. Like, if you ever wanted to put learning into practice, here's the greatest opportunity ever to put learning into practice. I'm telling you, you've got to separate your stories into 3 different types of stories. And in a moment, I'm going to tell you how you can get a story journal to do it just how I do it. To get a story journal, do it just how Pete Vargas does it. So that when we do sit down with Pete Vargas to write his talks and say, hey, we need a connection story, he's not like, I've never thought of a connection story. He's got a journal of funny stories, inspiring stories, connection stories, transformation stories, and yes, customer journey stories that are cloaked in teaching. The big difference between a testimonial and a teaching story is a testimonial has no content, and a teaching story actually teaches something. How does that story end? Sometimes you can give results, but you don't have to. That's not why you're doing it. You're doing it to map the journey. You're doing it to say, hey, somebody was at our event just like this the other day, and at the end of the event, they went to the back of the room and signed up for my coaching. On my first coaching call with that person, I taught them this: teaching, 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 teaching. It's teaching with the customer journey. Now, if you add results at the end, you actually add it, you turned it into a testimonial. That will raise skepticism for some people. That'll make some people feel like they're being sold. You can add results to some of them. I wouldn't add results to all of them. It's not the most important part of the story. The most important part of the story is that the audience member was just where you are right now. And the audience member took this next step. And because they took that next step, they were able to ask this question and get the help that they needed. Now, let's link all three of them together. You have to start with the connection story, because without it, you don't have trust, and the audience doesn't see themselves in the transformation. They only see you in the transformation. You follow the connection story with a transformation story, so the audience sees themselves being transformed. Because you're like them through the connection story, they can see themselves being transformed. They won't shake their head and be like, well, that's you. You've got a bigger list than me. Nope. They're going to see that story and be like, wow, you are like me. You struggle with bedtime too. You are like me. You put on weight during COVID too. You are like me. You struggle with what I struggle with. So I can make that transformation too. But how? How would I make that transformation? Oh, wait. Here's the customer journey story. Somebody who is sitting in the room just like me took this next step, whether that's signing up for a free download, scheduling a free appointment, buying my product, coming to my workshop, going to the retreat, signing up for my online course, and they got transformation and learned those things. You put the three of them together. This is why I call it the triple threat. I call it the triple threat because when you put the three of them together, you're like me. Because of that, I can transform like you. And now I know exactly how to do it. An example for consulting and coaching would be a story of connection where I'm like you, and then a transformation story where I wasn't doing it, and then I got some coaching or I got some help. I made an investment. Wow, when I first saw the price of that investment, my wife almost had a heart attack when I told her how much it was, but I believed in it, and I told her she should believe in me, and she did, and she does. And so we made the investment, and it's made all the difference in the world. And now today I'm doing everything the way you want to and the way I want to. And then my third story in that would be, I was speaking a couple of weeks ago at an event just like this. And one of the people in the audience, after I spoke, they signed up for our consulting and coaching package. And when I was on a call with them last week, they asked this question: how do you do this? And here are the 4 things I told them you needed to do. Teaching, 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 teaching. That's teaching. But it's also a story of how you go from where you are to where you want to be. No, I didn't tell those 3 stories. It would take a little longer to tell those 3 stories. But what didn't I do in those 3 stories? I didn't sell. I didn't push. I didn't pressure. I wasn't salesy. I don't feel slimy. I don't feel like I need to take a shower. I just told you 3 stories. 3 very simple stories. And I don't even have to make an offer, because now I do consulting and coaching. And if I walk off the stage and never make an offer, get off the podcast and never make the offer, you're either going to come up to me in the back of the room and be like, how do you become a consulting client? How do I join your coaching program? Or you're going to start Googling me and being like, what is this coaching program? How do I become a consultant? And you're going to be on the phone. You're going to be scheduling a call within minutes of me getting off stage, because I didn't even have to make an offer. The offer is the most overrated part of a presentation. And I'll finish with this. Everybody gets nervous at the offer. Everybody I talk to gets nervous at the offer. And I always tell people, don't get nervous when you make an offer. Chances are you've already screwed the whole thing up. And it's true. If you haven't told these 3 stories before your offer, the offer doesn't matter. If you haven't told these 3 stories before your offer, there's nothing you can do to make up for it in the last 5 minutes. You didn't tell the right 3 stories. And so tell a connection story, tell a transformation story, and tell a customer journey story. Everybody will know that you're like them. They'll know what they want, and they'll know what to do to get it. So to help you with this, we do have our story journal template, and they're going to drop the link for that right now in the chat. There it is, 10xstages.com/story. Well, it disappeared. /story journal. How amazing is that? 10xstages.com/story journal. If you want to see the same story journal that Pete Vargas uses, if you want to see the same story journal that I use, it's 10xstages.com/story journal. So how would you use this? Well, as you go through your life, things happen. And you aren't always thinking, I need stories, but today you are. So the next time you have a transformation, whether it's a weight transformation, a mindset transformation, a finance transformation, a relationship transformation, keep track of it. Keep track of that story. The next time something happens to you and you think, wow, I bet a lot of other people have experienced this. Like I was pulling up to a stoplight the other day, and there were 2 lanes to choose from, and I was kind of pulling up slow, and I was thinking, which lane should I get in? Which lane will go faster? And the one that I pulled in was not the faster lane. Has anybody else experienced that? And I was on my way to the grocery store. And when I got to the grocery store, there were like 3 lanes to check out. And I thought, which lane is going to be the fast lane? And the lane that I picked was not the fastest lane. Has anybody else experienced that? Like when those things happen, write them in your story journal. 10xstages.com/story journal is the place to download it. And then customer journey stories. Don't just keep track of testimonials. Map those back to where they met you and the decision that person made. So when you're at a conference, you can say, I was at a conference like this, and somebody in the audience came to the back of the room and signed up, and here's the story. Here's what I taught them. And then when you're putting together your presentation and you're like, oh, I need a transformation story, you aren't like, oh, what's a transformation? I'll make one up. You don't have to make one up. You've got a story journal. You've got connection stories, transformation stories, and customer journey stories. Those are the 3 stories you need to get people to do what you want them to do and go further with you. And so I want to thank you for being part of Backstage with PV3. I am Pat Quinn. Pete Vargas will be back next week. But for this week, just keep track of those stories. You can download the story journal at 10xstages.com/story journal, and just keep track of those stories and keep telling stories. The better you get at this, the more you do it, the more you practice, the more people who are going to come into your world and the larger impact you're going to have on this generation and the next. So on behalf of everybody at Backstage with PV3, thanks for being part of it this week. And Pete will be back next week. I'm Pat Quinn. Thanks for being here today.